offer two more presentations today before we go into our conservation cafe. First speaker is Emily Pejic, and she's originally from Southern Ontario and has spent time living in Southern Alberta. She's currently working on her master's in coastal and marine management at the University Centre of the West Fjords in Iceland. And she has a background in ecosystem restoration and is a board member for the Society for Ecological Restoration's Western Canada chapter. And she spends her free time knitting and eating baked goods. So welcome, Emily. I connected with Emily and her team when they were interested in doing a survey in BC on ecological restoration practices, and then ended up actually focusing on the Kootenays because of our strong partnership and being able to identify who's doing restoration here. So I'm excited to hear the results from your work. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. All right, hi, I'm Emily, and I will be presenting our project today. Rebecca and Zach are here too, and will be present for the question period. We were examining the application of theoretical ecosystem restoration principles, or put simply, we wanted to know if people actually doing ecosystem restoration were using the guidelines that our organization has spent a lot of time developing. This was a pilot study where we aimed to work out any issues in our methods. So if you have any feedback, we would love to hear it after the presentation. All right, so for the purpose of our research, we used SER's definition for ecological restoration, which is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Ecological restoration is an important tool for improving biodiversity and human well-being, and in improving ecosystem resilience in a changing climate. This project started in 2019 as a response to the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So, SER is the Society for Ecological Restoration, and its mission is to advance the science, practice, and policy of ecological restoration in order to sustain biodiversity, improve resilience in a changing climate, and reestablish an ecologically healthy relationship between nature and culture. There are 11 chapters across North America and even more chapters globally. My team are all board members of the Western Canada chapter that serves BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. For more than 3 decades, SER has given a voice to the field of ecological restoration and provided leadership in all aspects of its development. SER continues to develop the field through peer-reviewed journal Restoration Ecology, through conferences, webinars, books, certification program, and guiding documents like their 8 principles for successful ecological restoration. All right, so SER released a set of ecological restoration guidelines in 2016 and updated them in a second edition released in 2019. These principles and guidelines are meant to be used to help guide restoration project development and planning, and also highlight the role that ecological restoration has in connecting social, community, productivity, and sustainability goals. They include engaging stakeholders, drawing on many types of knowledge, using reference ecosystems, supporting the recovery process, having clear and measurable goals and objectives, seeking the highest level of recovery possible, adding value at a larger scale, and recognizing what part of the continuum your project may fall under. These principles are important as they provide a framework for restoration projects to achieve their intended goals set in a common language that allows for discussion and comparison of restoration projects across the globe. As people who have been engaged with SER for a few years, and with 2 out of 3 people on our team being taught about restoration specifically using these principles, we were curious as to how many ecological restoration practitioners across Canada actually knew about these principles and how many of them consciously or otherwise use them in the field. So we developed some research questions, and here are our questions. Do practitioners know about SER and its 8 principles for successful ecological restoration? Which principles are being used during ecological restoration projects? Which ecosystems are the main focus of ecological restoration projects, and what drives these projects? So what did we do? We chose to focus our scope on the Kootenay Conservation Program service area and began to develop our survey, which outlined the 8 principles of restoration. With Juliet's help, we contacted 55 organizations to anonymously answer our survey. The survey was open from April to May of this year, and we received 21 responses total, which is roughly 38% of a response rate, and of those responses, about half provided optional comments throughout the survey. So, are practitioners aware of SER? Yes, we would say so. About 2/3 of respondents heard of SER before our survey. Here is a breakdown of organization types. Many nonprofits heard of us, but also didn't. And when we asked the respondents who knew of SER if they had heard of the 8 principles, 2/3 of them knew, but only 3 respondents total said that they actively use the principles. So now we're going to continue with the rest of the survey and see if people use the principles unintentionally. All right, so for the first principle, we separated out Indigenous groups from the term stakeholder, as they are rights holders, which the SCR International terminology doesn't specifically discern. Our respondents all said that they engage with stakeholders and Indigenous groups at some level during their projects, but only 38% said that they always engage and incorporate Indigenous input into their projects. And meanwhile, 61% stated that they always engage stakeholders, but 30% actually incorporate their input every single time. On to principle number 2, all of our respondents incorporate external sources of information while planning their projects, main sources being other ecological restoration practitioners, technical reports, peer-reviewed literature, scientists, government, and Indigenous groups. Okay, for the third principle, the majority of respondents usually choose a specific native reference ecosystem as their target while planning their projects. Meanwhile, they choose the ecological choose a specific native ecosystem as a reference whenever they are able to do so. 1/4 of the respondents stated that they always do this, while an additional half said that they usually do it. So about, yeah, pretty much everybody. Moving on to the fourth principle, every participant assessed the potential for natural regeneration after restoration to some extent, with almost half always assessing the area. And while many respondents have capacity for contingency plans and adaptively managing restoration if there are unexpected results, 1/4 of respondents mentioned funding being a limiting factor in being able to do more work post initial restoration. For the fifth principle, yes, everyone usually has clear and measurable goals, with just over 50% of respondents saying that they always have them. And the sixth principle is seeking the highest level of recovery and considers 6 attributes. So this is an example of a recovery wheel. 3 of these were considered the most, and those 3 were the ecosystem function, species composition, and absence of threats, while the other 3 were not universally considered during the project and were external exchange, structural diversity, and physical condition of the ecosystem. This could be due to limitations in time, project scale, or other factors. As for principle 7, increasing large-scale values like landscape connectivity, reduction in extinction risks, or ecosystem threats appears on every single respondent's checklist, with only 1 participant not considering how their project can increase the larger scale values around them. And in terms of the ecological restoration continuum, most projects fall under rehabilitation, so repairing ecosystem function and initiating initiating native recovery, while few projects fall on either end of the continuum, striving for either the full recovery or reducing societal impacts. So overall, despite only 3 people out of our 21 respondents saying that they follow SER's principles of restoration, it appears that the majority of participants adhere to similar principles for their projects. All right, moving on to our third question. We saw that the majority of restoration work in this area is being done for grasslands and freshwater ecosystems, which are tied for first place with 13 respondents saying that they consider them or work with them. And then second place is kind of forests and lentic riparian ecosystems with 10 respondents. Saying that they work with them. And then lastly, we have the lotic riparian areas. So those are the top 5, and you can kind of see that there are more there, but yeah. So what triggers ecological restoration projects in the Kootenays? So first, I'll define what our drivers were. Environmental drivers are mainly motivated by conserving the native ecosystems, flora and fauna. Traditional and indigenous value drivers are motivated by restoring and maintaining traditional uses and activities. Law and policy drivers are motivated by the need to comply with legislation, policy, or permit conditions. Lastly, socioeconomic drivers are motivated by increasing job availability and improving economic health of a community. So, though many respondents mentioned socioeconomic drivers related to their work, not a single respondent listed socioeconomic as their primary driver for ecological restoration. And as you can see, conservation was the main driver for 85% of our respondents. 2 respondents listed traditional indigenous values as their main driver, and both were indigenous affiliated organizations. 1 respondent listed law and policy compliance as their main driver, and they were a government affiliated organization. All right, so based on the pilot study, it appears that the majority of respondents are aware of SER. And while only 3 respondents actively use SER's principles for successful restoration, the principles appear representative of the overall values and project considerations in the area. Another key finding was that the vast majority of restoration projects are focused on grassland and freshwater ecosystems. And finally, our survey demographic consists mainly of nonprofits driven by conservation. So we think that our low response rate could be a result from our survey being deployed at the start of field season when practitioners are at their busiest. For future surveys, we plan to engage practitioners at a slower time of year for them, so perhaps late fall, early winter. When addressing ecosystem recovery, our respondents focused mainly on the small scope aspects of recovery, like what species you want or don't want in your restored area, and less on larger scope aspects like interactions with the entire landscape, gene flow, and incorporating all levels of vegetation strata and trophic levels, and addressing any physical conditions of the site. This could be from lack of capacity to be able to do such large-scale projects, or perhaps it could just be that it's hard to find large enough areas that haven't been parceled off to work with. This leads to the problem of financial limitations, which can affect how much you can actually afford to restore. So our next steps are to expand our research area to Western Canada and perhaps all of Canada. We plan to contract a market research organization to identify as many groups across Western Canada or all of Canada to create our next list of contacts. After surveying all of these restoration practitioners, we plan to identify differences and similarities in ecological restoration values across our study region. And We plan to use this pilot study as a jumping off point to consult restoration practitioners across the country, starting with Western Canada. We aim to identify shared ecological restoration values across the country and geographically distinct areas in order to eventually provide better tools for geographically distinct priorities. So thank you for listening, and to anyone in the audience who has participated in our survey, thank you. We appreciate the time that you've given us, and if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. I've added mine and Rebecca's contact info at the bottom if you want to get in contact with us.
Thank you, Emily. That was excellent to hear the survey responses from these organizations in the Kootenays.